So, photography is ubiquitous. On a daily basis, we encounter photographs of varying sorts, at work, at home, and everywhere in between. For many, it goes without saying that photographic representation forms the basis for the vast majority of technological mediums that populate our lives, especially those images that intrude into our intimate spaces via cell phones and television screens. Cinema, perhaps the most universally appreciated art form, was born out of the accelerated montage of more than 24 photographic images per second, a technique that creates the illusion of fluid motion for normal human perception. Photographic technology, moreover, operates in places and spaces that we do not usually consider, the courtroom and the scientific laboratory, for example. Indeed, such images operate as a legitimate form of evidence in juridical proceedings and as a material for verifying scientific hypotheses in the lab. How is this variegated function and vast social pervasion of photography possible? If one went outside to ask a random pedestrian the question, what do photographs do? They would naturally reply that photographs show us what is real. Their subsequent frustration would be due, of course, to the banal obviousness of this question. That is, because everyone knows that photographs in fact show reality, naturally. My dissertation research radically challenges this seemingly natural assumption that photography has the ability to unproblematically capture and transparently represent reality. By marshaling the Marxian tools of ideology critique and materialist dialectics, I contend that photographic realism, what is more formally known as photographic indexicality, should be understood as an ideology rather than an inherent ontological property of the medium itself. In this regard, photographs ought to be conceived semiotically, that is, as signs whose signification produce a specific meaning and thus a certain reality effect. By exposing the ideological quality of our common sense assumptions about photography and its social function, my dissertation elucidates a vastly under-theorized domain that has a significant social and political import for contemporary society. That of the discursive, institutional, technical, and aesthetic mediation of photographic images. In other words, my project opens a theoretical space for understanding the historically and socially determined ways in which photographic images are framed and their meanings rendered hegemonic by the various technical procedures, institutional practices, and operative discourses of our society. It is within this space, moreover, that we can thus glimpse the process of social struggle that undergirds all forms of representation and that crucially determines the operative meaning of our various encounters with them. Thank you.
Question in the back.
So am I correct in understanding that kind of like the takeaway message is that instead of photographs represent reality, it's like that you are trying to more academically show that beauty is in the eye of the beholder? Is that correct in understanding?
I'd maybe say no, that it's not really the eye of the beholder, but yes, there's a certain sense that perhaps that adage has a little bit of meaning, but I'm not saying that outright that photography doesn't have a connection to the real and that it doesn't represent reality straight away. But what I'm saying is it is more complicated than simply that photographs simply just give us a unproblematic representation of reality or a transparency or something like that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. I can shout, but you're so fast. So I love all of this, and I cannot wait for it to be a book. What do you think the connection is between your research, which seems to be historically focused, and the present moment of photography, which is even more ubiquitous than it has ever been because we really define the world as real on our stupid Instagram?
Yeah, there's a lot to say. So you must be thinking also of like post-truth society sort of discourses. So precisely that. There's also, in my dissertation and in the chapter that I worked on over the summer, I use a sort of parallel example to illustrate things, which is the statue removal movement. So very quickly, right, there's a movement to remove Confederate monuments. And how I frame this is basically talking about the social struggle that determines the meaning of images. The statue removals movement in these statues, on one hand, a certain group of very conservative individuals think that they represent history, whichever that means. But what they really represent is the inscription of white power and white supremacy into physical space. And so it's sort of a doubling down on Jim Crow and all of this. And so in that way, those very specific images, those actual statues are in struggle, right? And we're struggling over the meaning of them between history and them being a sign of white supremacy, right? And so this is how my research applies. And I just want to make the move to talk about photography rather than statues, if that helps.
Absolutely, yeah. Very cool.
20 seconds left, so.
I got you.
So, Jared, is the ideology in the mechanism of photographic machine? Is it in the training of photographers? Is it in the culture of photography? Where's the ideology? How's it produced and where's it present?
I would say, well, it's perhaps in all those things, but it's first and foremost in the formation of a subject, right? So I'm talking about the formation of actual consciousness, right? So the ideology is in forming a subject and a subject that looks in a certain way. I'm sorry to stop, and I hope that answers your question, John.